I was commissioned in June of '66, second lieutenant infantry, and immediately was assigned to Fort Riley, Kansas to train the Ninth Infantry Division. And so for 6 months, from June of '66 to December of '66, trained with the Ninth Division at Fort Riley. Kind of interesting, typical Army thing. You train in the flat plains of Kansas to go deploy to a jungle operation. So did that. But while I was there, I had the opportunity to attend jungle school down in Panama. Gave me a little taste of what it might be like when I get to Vietnam.
Really? So they sent you down to Panama to get with the heat and the humidity, mosquitoes, and all of that.
Right. It was a 2-week program. We built bohías, lived out in the jungle for the first week. Learned how to rappel, learned how to do patrolling, just the typical things that you need to know as an infantry soldier in the jungle. So it was really a good school. Very well done. Very well done.
In this whole process of training, did you have Vietnam veterans who were among your instructors?
No, we didn't. Most of like the TAC officers at OCS, most of them had just finished OCS themselves, the previous class.
Sure.
We did have some instructors in the classroom that had been in Vietnam, but very little. The number of people that had already been in Vietnam. I was early on in this whole mess.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's what I was going to ask you. August '65, December '66. Certainly the war is heating up. The Marines are there. Air operations are underway, and things are building. You say you had some instructors who had spent time in Vietnam. To what extent was Vietnam in your mind? You're an Army officer, you're going to Panama, presumably you're going to Panama to prepare for Vietnam. The conditions might be somewhat similar. To what extent was Vietnam in your mind, or to what extent was there a sense of inevitability that when all this training is done, I'm going to Vietnam? Or was Vietnam not much in your mind through this whole process of training?
No, it was in my mind. I knew it. That was where we were going to end up. I mean, everybody in my whole OCS class was assigned to a unit in Vietnam, or a unit that was going to deploy to Vietnam. Some went to the Big Red One, some went to the 25th, some went to the, as I did, went to the 9th Division to train with them for deployment. So we knew it was coming, so we really, I would have to say, we soaked up the training because we knew it was going to be important.
What was your own thinking about that? If there's a feeling of inevitability that you're going to Vietnam, was it just something to get through and get behind you? Was it something that you looked forward to? Was it something you were curious about? Before you actually get there, while Vietnam is still something of an abstraction, what was your own thinking about it?
I will say that we were so well trained, we were conditioned that we knew we were going to go there. We were conditioned for it. And I just accepted it. My general nature is, I couldn't change things. So I was going. And so, again, like I said, I soaked up the training, tried to get the best I could out of it. And, it was inevitable. And I don't know, I wasn't even apprehensive about it. I just,
Really?
but they really train you well at Fort Benning. The OCS program is terrific.
I know we're talking about things, that took place decades ago. So I wouldn't anticipate.
That's true.
Yeah. So I wouldn't anticipate that you would have a detailed response, but just as you reflect back on that young person you were I'm assuming your early 20s, just as a thought experiment, let's say when you have a little downtime in Panama, another officer who's going through this program with you says, "Hey, Bob, what is this thing in Vietnam all about? Why are we even in Vietnam? What's the point of that conflict over there?" What do you think you would have said at this point? We're looking at late '66.
Well, probably at that point in time, I would have said it's the domino theory. We're over there because we're trying to prevent communism from creeping into Southeast Asia. One country's going to fall, the next is going to fall, the next is going to fall. That was really the theory that probably went through everybody else's mind. Obviously, later on, we changed that idea of that happening, but that was really the prevalent thought amongst all of us at that time.
Well, put us on the flight from the US to Vietnam. I imagine it's not a straight shot. I imagine you have a layover somewhere. What recollection do you have of that long series of flights from the
Really
US to Vietnam?
quite a bit of remembrance of that particular flight. Well, first, the division deployed over by boat.
Really?
I was in the advanced party. So we flew out of Forbes Field in Kansas. I was on a C-141. It was structured to have really the jump seats of paratroopers in it. And we rode in that thing for 28 hours.
Oh, wow.
We landed first at Alaska, Elmdorf, Alaska. And
Mhm.
then every time the plane landed, something broke. The radios broke once. They couldn't get the ramp closed at the back once. So we had a couple layovers, again, one in Elmdorf, Alaska, the other at Yokota, Japan. Same thing happened, plane broke. But it was a 28-hour total flight.
Wow.
If I'm not going to, the time on the ground obviously won't count. And we were kind of cramped, but that was it. That's how they took us over there.
Okay, so
Landed at I believe at Benoit Air Base,
Benoit.
and that was the beginning. That was my beginning of my tour.
So you were not on these commercial flights that we hear about with flight attendants and all of that. You were on a military flight in a jump seat, basically.
Exactly right. It was a U.S. Air Force flight. I flew home commercial, but I flew over on a C-141, and it was manned by a bunch of Air Force guys.
Yeah.
And
again, just to the extent possible, reflecting back on yourself on the series of flights from Kansas to Alaska, Alaska to Japan. You know that when you arrive at Elmendorf in Alaska, you're still a long way from Vietnam. Is your own thinking changing as you're getting closer to Vietnam? Do you feel yourself becoming more serious, or were you very serious from the beginning? Or was there any sort of process you went through as that plane gets closer and closer to South Vietnam?
no, not really. I mean, I was ready for it. I just felt totally conditioned by the training that this is what we're going to have to do. I really wasn't fearful. I just, I guess I'm somewhat of a religious person. I knew somebody was watching over me. And I was never afraid. I just never had any fear about that. Maybe I was unusual as a person in that respect, but I just never was afraid.
So your plane arrives Benoit, December 66. The door opens. You have your first personal interaction with the air of Vietnam. You set sight before long on the first piece of Vietnam that you take in with your eyes. What's the very first memory you have of, after arriving in South Vietnam, of the country?
Well, obviously the climate is the first thing that everybody is exposed to. The weather is warm, it's humid. We had just left a relatively cold state in Kansas. It was, we had some missions, some training missions where we were in very heavy sleeping bags to stay warm. And here we are in a tropical area, and it was warm, of course. The ramp drops down, we walk out the back, and we're in a whole new environment for ourselves. I just remember a lot of activity. It was a military base, a lot of things going on. No mortars coming in, nothing really scary, but there we were in Vietnam, ready to go.
What was the first thing you experienced that drove home to you that this really is a war zone? Of course, you know that going in, you know that you're going into a war zone. You've been trained for that, but you haven't experienced anything yet that really makes that concrete. What's the first thing you can recall that really drove the point home to you that this is a war zone?
Well, certainly all the military vehicles running around, everybody walking around with an M16 with a real live magazine in it, full of rounds. The fact, you're now carrying a weapon. We weren't even given ammunition when we got off the plane, obviously, but that takes a while before they'll give you that. But you get off the plane, and I mean, just the activity tells you that, hey, there's something going on here. And like the first evening or so, you might see Puff the Magic Dragon out there. It's a C-47 flying gunship spewing down tracer rounds in the distance. Tells you something's going on. There might be a battle back there, and somebody could be hurt.
Wow. So, I mean, did you hear and see those things that you saw? Of course, the military vehicles and the soldiers with their weapons and so on. You mentioned Puff the Magic Dragon. Is that something that you saw the first night or the second night or very early?
Very early on, probably first or second night. I mean, it was they were using Puff quite extensively in the area where I was.
Wow.
And it's quite an experience to hear that thing go off.
Wow. Where did you go from Benoit? Or how long were you in Benoit?
Well, we weren't there very long. They just loaded us on a bunch of deuce and a halves and drove us over to Bearcat, which was the base camp for the 9th Infantry Division. It was very early on in the construction of the base camp, so we stayed in GP medium tents, and there was no roads. It's got again just had been carved out of the jungle. So we were there for probably a week or two before I went off and did my advanced party training with the 4th Infantry Division.
And where did you do that training?
Well, we went down to an area called Na Bay. It was an area south of Saigon.
Yeah.
And I met up with an infantry company down there, and they put me on ambush patrols right away it's an area where there's a lot of water, and we were looking for sampans or boats and things that might be carrying VC or cargo that they might need. So we set up ambush patrols along the riverbank with them.
So is this then how you would characterize most of your work through that year? You mentioned ambush patrols, so setting up ambushes for Viet Cong. I'm assuming that comes
Right.
through. Also, I imagine looking out for Viet Cong ambushes. I imagine that's part of it as well.
Right. Our whole mission was patrol. Search and seizure. Go out, look around for things. We would go out generally just as a platoon, me in charge. And but I would have to say our basic mission was to secure the Benoit ammunition depot. Now, we weren't close in. We're 30 miles out from where the depot was. But we would patrol in the jungle around that area looking for any VC activity.
Say you've got a sampan coming down. Let's say you've got one or two people on the sampan, the traditional conical hat, the traditional
Right.
outfits, no indication that they're military, obviously no uniform. What sort of things do you look for to determine whether this is just a South Vietnamese person carrying on with her life, or this is somebody who's actively helping the Viet Cong? What sorts of things do you look for to make this determination?
Well, of course, you try to pull the sampan over. When we were generally, obviously, on ambush patrols at night in the dark, and if anybody came down at night in the dark, they possibly could have been VC. You look to see if they're carrying any cargo, or have anything covered on the sampan that it might be discriminating as to what they might be doing. But that was not. We really didn't come across very much doing that.
Yeah. So as you think about this year, you said your year is primarily characterized by going out on patrol, keeping this this part of the base secure. You said it's the ammunition dump at
Yeah, Benoit was
Ben-
where the
Benoit.
big ammo depot.
Okay.
The VC actually, I think, during Tet blew up a whole bunch of stockpiles of ammo during then. They penetrated the perimeter and all. You try to interdict anything that is coming close to Benoit, to the ammo dump. And so that's why we were just really patrolling around the jungle looking for any VC activity.
Okay. And so that's basically then how your year plays out, doing these kinds of missions over that year. And I know you've got your time of R&R as well, but roughly that year, what sorts of things did you come across? What sorts of things did you find that especially stick out in your mind?
One was I call it the longest patrol, and I was sent out, just my platoon. We were probably 2 or 3 or 4 clicks away from Bearcat, maybe even further away than that. And they said, walk back. We were pretty far away from any communications. We were carrying what was called a 292 port. It's an antenna, very heavy antenna to try to keep us in communications with the base camp. It was just a real long patrol. We're out at night, it's raining, and we were basically lost from the standpoint of no communication back to base camp.
Wow.
But, we went on this long patrol and we really found nothing. But that's good because we don't want the interdiction in close to Benoit, to the ammo depot. One of the things we discovered on the patrol was a VC tunnel complex, and it was really interesting. Probably they said about 6 stories deep. We found a dental chair. The dental chair was very interesting. It was powered by a bicycle. Can you imagine having somebody drill your teeth with a drill powered by a bicycle? Well, that's what we found. Dental chair. We went down inside the tunnel. In fact, I think I sent you the picture of me in the tunnel.
Yeah.
That was probably the most exciting thing that we came across. All the generals and everything wanted to come out and see it. And so we carved out an LZ for a Huey to come in. The generals all came out, went down the tunnel, and were quite impressed with it. There was rooms underneath where they had meetings and maybe even had a mess hall. Mainly, we think that the tunnel complex was used as a hospital because we found an awful lot of medical supplies that had been left behind. But that was probably the most exciting thing we came across.
And one of the things you found was this dental chair,
Right,
powered by bicycle.
by a bicycle.
Whatever tools the dentist is using that need power, or that power is generated by a bicycle, a stationary
Yeah,
bicycle.
you remember the old bicycle lights that had the little generator that rubbed against the tire?
Right. Yeah.
That's what they had. Can you imagine that being the light? And here this dentist is pedaling like crazy to make the drill run, the light come on, and he's working on your teeth.
Oh, I see. So the light is generated from that. How, just in terms of yards, you maybe compare it to the size of a football field, something like that. And I know that we're talking about levels, but how extensive was this underground system that you found, in terms of just overall, just guessing square feet sort of thing?
Oh, that's tough to put a measurement on. It wasn't spread out all that much. It was just quite deep, we thought.
Yeah.
The Cu-Chi tunnels are the ones that everybody talks about. And those are now a tourist attraction.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you go visit Vietnam. And this one was, I really have no estimate of how big that it may have been spread out. I really have no idea. But I just remember the depth, quite extensive.
Now, you hear veterans say, in relation to these tunnels, in relation to Marble Mountain, I mean, maybe the most extraordinary story is you've got soldiers and Marines all over Marble Mountain up in I Corps, and then after the war, you find that inside Marble Mountain was something like what you're describing. So you've got Marines and soldiers walking on top, and then underground, you have a VC complex down there.
Precisely, the Coochie base camp for the 25th Division was on top of a VC tunnel complex.
So you find this, and it's not just a cave. It's something that's really elaborate and that
Right.
indicates a level of cleverness, to keep this thing going. Well, what did you take from that when you think about the enemy, the nature of the enemy that we're up against? What message did that tunnel complex send?
Well, they're very hard workers. They're very persistent. You certainly have to admire what they were doing. I mean, they obviously believed very strongly in what they were fighting for. I mean, you don't dig a tunnel like that just for fun. The darn thing was built for their use, and it required a tremendous amount of work. I was just amazed that these things stay intact as they have during the rainy season when a lot of water and all, but yet they still have these tunnels that they use, and they used them quite extensively to move around. The whole Tet Offensive got started. They infiltrated in through the tunnel complexes.
Did it occur to you at the time that the South Vietnamese living in that area, that they must have known about this tunnel complex?
Well, not this one, but this was relatively deep in the jungle. It was not near a populated area.
Okay.
I'm sure some of the other things that we did, the people knew the VC were nearby, but I don't think they knew that tunnel existed because, like I said, it was really quite deep in the jungle.
I see. You just mentioned other things that you did, and locals knew that VC were close by. Is there a particular story you're willing to share?
Yeah, there's one I would like to share. I call it in my little essays and things that I've written, I call it the ambush. Because what happened one day, we were right outside a little village called Ap Bin Song. We were actually in the village, and it was right outside of a Michelin rubber plantation. Well, we hear a firefight off in the distance, a lot of shooting and everything, and everything quieted down. We were kind of wondering what was that, and a little bit later we find out that one of our long-range recon patrols had not checked in. There's what we call a sit rep, situation report, to the base camp, and they hadn't checked in, and eventually, they were missing. So what we had to do was figure out why they were missing. Platoon was assigned the job of tracking them down. And this is the one time when we worked with dogs. We had a canine tracking dog with us. And so we went out to the far end of the rubber plantation to track down this patrol. And we're halfway through our mission. We did find their trail. We were walking along the trail, and we came across, we got a radio message that a local citizen had mentioned to our company commander that there was an ambush, and there was unfortunately some soldiers were hurt. And so we dropped our caution and proceeded to where we knew this ambush had taken place. And it was the worst thing that I really had to find over there. There were 8 American GIs who had been walked into a perfect U-shaped ambush, and they were wiped out. And it was really tough to come across that, to see some of these people we knew had been wiped out, ambushed by I'd have to say, a very, very successful VC ambush. They walked into it. And it was well constructed. It was a U-shaped ambush, and they didn't stand a chance. They made a mistake. And unfortunately, they gave their lives because of it.
And so you came across that scene then of these 8 soldiers who
That's correct. Yeah, we were not the first ones there. Once they discovered what had happened, they sent out a medical party or another group to see what it was all about. When we got there again, everybody was afraid that the bodies were all booby trapped, and so the medical corps, or the people that were, I guess, graves registration, that were afraid to pick up the bodies. So my platoon knew these were our brothers, and so we picked them up. First, we pulled each body with a rope to make sure there was no booby traps on it. We pulled the bodies, put them in the body bags. There's rumors that these people had been mutilated, dumped in a ditch, and all that, and that was not true. There was no mutilation. That it was again a well executed, a very clean ambush, and unfortunately, 8 of our guys were in that ambush and lost their lives. That's the worst thing I'd have to say that happened to me in Vietnam. Just have to clean that up. My thoughts go out to the families of those who perished. They never had the opportunity to live a full life. No girlfriend, no marriage, no children. The casualties of war are devastating. The casualties of Ap and Son, average age 21 and a half years. This was a situation where I almost got it. I was so close. And it was election day in Vietnam. The people of this little village, Ap and Son, were going to their county seat to vote. And we get up in the morning and we see their little 3-wheeled Isetta things, that go down the road and they turn around and come back. They go down the road and they turn around and come back. So my company commander says for me to take my platoon and go down and find out, why are they turning around? Why are they coming back? And we were recon by fire, which is, you just shoot ahead to make sure there's no ambush. So we recon by fire. We get around Bend, and there is a barricade across the main road that they would use to get into the voting area. And there's next to the barricade, there's a Viet Cong flag and a big sign. And so we figured, if we want them to go vote, we need to clean up that barricade. Well, being really cautious, we did recon by fire around the area, make sure there was no ambush for us. So we go and start tearing apart the barricade, being very, very careful, figuring, oh, it's booby trap, it's booby trap. Finally, we said, no, we don't see anything. Well, little did we know, hidden deep within the brush was an American model hand grenade with a tripwire that ran through the brush, discovered at the very last second. If it had not been discovered, I would not be here. And so that was the closest I came to getting it in Vietnam. And nothing happened. I mean, we found it and disarmed it. And but that would have been a disaster for me.
How was it discovered? Did one of your soldiers just spot something and tell you to freeze?
Yeah, we were starting to tear apart the barricade. We spotted it, and again, just by luck. There's the Lord was looking after me again on that one. So that was interesting.
Wow.
Interesting situation.
So how did you dispose of that? Did you have someone on the team who was trained to?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was an American hand grenade. It was quite easy for us to disarm. I don't know why I was saved. I'm sure a lot of people have that experience. Why was I saved? Why was I spared? And it would have been right in front of me had it gone off.
I'm thinking about this trap that you described. You've got the tunnels, and you say that the tunnel complex you found was way out in the jungle. And so maybe locals wouldn't know about that, but you've got this trap, you've got the ambush, you have the tunnel complex you described, but then you've got very complex tunnel systems that a lot of the locals must have at least heard about. What was your own thinking about South Vietnamese? And what's behind this question is, a lot of vets say, who had any interactions at all with South Vietnamese, or who just saw them from a distance, they came to the conclusion that it wasn't possible really to trust anyone there aside from the soldiers that you were with. Was that your own feeling? Did you sort of come to the conclusion that, it doesn't really matter how much they're smiling at you, it doesn't matter how nice they seem to be, there's a good chance they're with the Viet Cong, and so I just don't trust any of them. Was that your own disposition?
Pretty much, yes. This village that we spent so much time at Ben Song, it was off the beaten trail. It was away. It was on the edge of a Michelin rubber plantation, and of course, most of the people in the village worked in the rubber plantation. But you always felt like, they were so close to the jungle, or so close to the supply routes, so close to other things that would influence their relationship with us, that you kind of felt like, no, I don't trust them. We tried, our medics would go out and treat the kids in the village, and we had a little, we went and swam in the local creek, and some of them swam with us, and there's some nice things that happened, but I just never felt like we were related in any sort of way with what they were doing. We had no interaction that was very, very positive.
Did you go into Saigon much? You were near Saigon. Did you go into the city on?
Sure did. Yeah, I had some things that we were close enough to where we could hop in a Jeep and drive down for the day. And, what did I do there? Well, we go maybe, go to the officers club, or go up to one of the hotels or something, and go up to the top of the hotel. You go there for the big PX. They had a good PX there where you can go shopping. So we did do some things within the city, but we didn't stay the night there. We would, always drive back to Bearcat before dark.
When you were in Saigon, walking down the streets, did you feel that you could, sort of relax, or did you always feel like you had to be hyper aware of what was going on around you?
I just didn't feel uncomfortable. Obviously your head's on a swivel, a lot of traffic, there's a lot of people. And I, as you can see, I like to smile. So I smiled at people and they would smile back. And, it wasn't negative at all.
Yeah.
Not bad at all.
Yeah. You left South Vietnam in December 67.
Correct.
We know it's coming the next month. The Tet Offensive is coming.
That's right.
The next month. But when you leave, what we're hearing, what we're reading in the newspapers, what we're hearing on the news is that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that, the situation in Vietnam is looking pretty good, and we see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then, of course, Tet hits, and, that kind of changes everything. What was your own feeling when you left Vietnam? Some veterans say they didn't think about it at all. It just wasn't, they didn't worry about it at all, whether the war was going well or not. They just did their job and got in and got out. Others had views. Do you have recollections of when you fly out of Vietnam in December 67? Did you feel that, that the thing was going well, that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, that maybe South Vietnam will be able to stand up on its own as an independent country?
Yeah, I felt pretty good about it. Again, I was a very small, concentrated part of Vietnam. It was my platoon. It was, the 9th Division, my company. We really didn't know what was going on up in the north, where things were a lot hotter than what we were facing. We were in a very, very, very quiet area. I was, lucky from that respect. And I got home. I landed, commercial flight. Went out of Benoit, landed at McGuire Air Force Base. It was 40 miles from where I was living in New Jersey at the time. Wow. I got on the phone, called my brother up, come and get me, and I was basically done. Yeah, I still had 6 months to do, but I was done with Vietnam, and knew my service time was going to be winding down. And so I didn't follow it that much. And when I the Tet Offensive, again, I just don't remember following it on. Obviously, I watched the news, but I don't know. It just didn't surprise me that it happened.
That's
One of the
happened.
things, yeah, I mean, one of the things that we had discovered, not my platoon, but some other units of the Ninth Division, they had discovered a lot of arms storage supplies, caches, I guess you call them, that were obviously set up, that they're wrapped in cosmoline outside of Saigon, being deployed for when the Tet Offensive was going to come along. I mean, we didn't know at the time that that's why they were stored there, but we did find, not me, but like I said, some other units of the Ninth found some hidden supplies that were there set up for the VC. So there's a lot of preliminary information, but they should have known. In fact, I think they did know that it was coming and were ready.
Something was coming. Yeah.
Something was coming.
So you knew about this, but Tet hits, and now things make sense. So now we understand why they were stockpiling these weapons close to Saigon.
Right.
Aircap.
Exactly.
Yeah. How about April 1975? By this point, you've been out of the military for several years. Of course, Saigon falls and South Vietnam falls, Saigon falls April 75. Did that really strike you at all, or were you just deep into getting on with your own life and not paying a whole lot of attention? How did that go for you?
Well, by then I really was getting along with my life. I was starting a career and all that. But I felt disappointed. I kept thinking about the people that were lost, or were they lost in vain? Why did they give their lives up? Because, I mean, even though, Vietnam now is relatively free, it's a very prosperous country, but it's been, 57 years or so since I was there. And, again, I think that either we should have fought the war to win it, or we should have gotten out a long time ago.
A long time. Do you feel, when you say we should have fought the war to win it, did you have any experience as a leader, as a military leader, as an officer in Vietnam? Did you have experience with rules of engagement where you felt like you weren't really, like your hands were tied and that the war wasn't being prosecuted the way it really needed to be?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems you have is getting clearance for artillery support. You have to get, ARVN ground clearance, ARVN air clearance, U.S. ground clearance, U.S. air clearance. By the time you get all the clearances that are necessary to get the support that you may want to get, you don't need it anymore.
Because the VC have gone.
They've gone, and the rules of engagement in some instances were ridiculous. I mean, either you fight a war to win it or not. And some of the things that we were, I guess, required to do. I mean, you didn't even want to get into a firefight without getting permission to get into it. So, a lot of ridiculous rules
that the Viet Cong obviously did not adhere to themselves.
Oh, of course,
They don't.
No, not in the least.
Looking back now, several decades later, I asked you, when you're going through training, what was the conflict in Vietnam all about? And you mentioned the domino theory, and and some veterans say, hey, the domino theory may have been overblown, but there was something to it. The communists did have designs on Thailand. That was stopped. The communists clearly had designs on Laos and Cambodia. Those countries did become communist. So, so there are some veterans who don't dismiss the domino theory. But that's what you mentioned. And of course, that's what most people are thinking. As you look back on it decades later now, you have interactions with a lot of Vietnam veterans. You're active with Vietnam vets. What does the war mean to you now?
The thing that I keep thinking about are the people that lost their lives in that war, the 58,000 young soldiers that couldn't live a life like I've been able to live. I've been married for 53 years. I've got wonderful daughters. I've got 6 grandkids. They didn't have the opportunity to have that, and that bugs me. That it was taken away from them by a war that I don't really think was totally necessary.
What do you remember about your very first interaction with that wall when you went to DC for the first time and went down to where the memorial is?
No, I just, immediately I went to the book where they've got all the names and the locations of the people, and I immediately went and found some of the names of people that I remember that lost their lives, and it's very moving. It's again, like I say, it's hallowed ground for a Vietnam veteran, and I feel that way every time I go near it.
When you look at 22, 23, 24-year-olds today, is it kind of amazing to you that you had the amount of responsibility you had as a person that young?
Absolutely. I mean, I was responsible for the lives of 43 people, and but one of my squad leaders, and this always gets to me every time I talk about it. One of my squad leaders carved the unit crest for the 39th Infantry in wood for me, and on the back he wrote, "Thanks for bringing me home."
Wow.
Every time I say that or think about that, I get cold chills, because that's what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to bring you home, and I did. And I brought all of my people home. And I mean, we were lucky. We were in a very quiet area of Vietnam. We were not up in the DMZ where, the firefights constantly and all. We just didn't have that. But we still had things that were scary, booby traps, just the climate, just a lot of potential problems. But to be told that, thank you for bringing me home, that's, again, that was my responsibility. That was my job. And in fact, I just talked to the individual that carved that yesterday. And, it means an awful lot to me.